All right, YouTube is telling me we are live right now, and I'm just going to verify that that is the case and that all is well before getting into. There we go. Looks like we are live and everything is great. So, welcome to my special Speaking of Cults podcast. I'm very glad you have joined me today. Um, I thought I would do a live show to sort of celebrate and hunker down and share some reflections about, the work and what we are doing here. In fact, let me flip over here to my other screen so I can sort of see what's happening as we're going. So, not only is this episode 100 of this podcast, but YouTube also informed me this week that it's been 12 years since I first started my YouTube journey. And that's a lot of water under the bridge. And I've been sitting here thinking, after all this time, talking about cults and coercion and influence and belief and psychology and all of it. What's the one thing I actually feel qualified to say? Because if I'm honest, I don't feel like someone who has all the answers. I feel more like someone who's run into the same wall over and over again. And that wall is this: you can't save everyone. And I want to be really clear right up front. This isn't me saying that helping doesn't matter, and it's not me throwing up my hands, and it's not me saying, well, people are hopeless and just forget it. It's actually the opposite. It's me talking about something I had to learn the hard way. That there's a difference between caring about people and trying to take responsibility for their lives. And when you spend years studying coercion and control and belief systems, you start seeing patterns everywhere. You see people stuck in bad relationships, in bad groups, bad ideas, bad cycles. You can see the emotional hooks and the manipulation and the blind spots. And when you care, your instinct is, I have to help them see this. If I explain it better, maybe I can get through. And that comes from a good place. But what I've learned, slowly and reluctantly, is that caring does not give me the authority over someone else's choices. Knowledge does not override someone else's autonomy. And even the best explanations in the world can't compete with someone's emotional needs or fears or identity or attachments. And that's not a failure of logic. That's being human. And somewhere along the way, and I don't think this is just me, I think this is part of getting older, your relationship with your own expectations changes too. When you're younger, there's this sense that if you care enough, and if you work hard enough, and if you understand enough, that you can really move the needle on the world. You could fix big things. You could wake people up. You can prevent disasters if you just explain it clearly enough. And there's a kind of a heroic scale built into that thinking. And then life happens. You show up, you try, you put in the work, you care deeply, and you start to notice something uncomfortable. The world is bigger than your understanding. People are more complicated than your explanations. And outcomes are not directly proportional to effort. And that realization can feel like failure at first, especially if your life didn't unfold exactly how you imagined when you were younger. But I don't think that this stage of life is about shrinking. I think it's about coming into proportion. You stop measuring meaning by how much you can control or fix or change, and you start measuring it by how you show up inside the limits you actually have. And that's not giving up on impact. It's letting go of the illusion of control. And kind of weirdly, that makes you gentler, makes you less frantic, less desperate to make people see what you see, and maybe a little bit more able to let people be who they are and still care about them. So what I wanted to do with this episode is not make it into a lecture, but kind of make it more into a kind of a checkpoint. After 100 episodes, here's what I've had to learn about people, about relationships, and about the limits of what any of us can do for someone else, even when we love them, even when we're right, even when we can see the train coming down the tracks about to hit them. And so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. And I wanted to start with a little bit of a story that has not a lot to do with cults directly, but was sort of a personal thing that sort of, maybe sparked some of this thinking. And it had to do with a relationship, a friendship that my wife had. And she, let me see, how do I put this? It was a tumultuous friendship. And it was certainly valid, and they certainly, my wife and her friend, who I will call Susie, that's not her name, met, got along, went out, did things, social events, outings, trips, all kinds of stuff. And yet there was this constant problem with Susie's boyfriend, who was a bit toxic and was a bit of an abusive personality, verbally abusive, financially abusive, a lot of judgment, a lot of invalidation, a lot of talking down to Susie, a lot of messing with her head. And of course, my wife Mel would relate this to me, and I would try to offer up some advice or help, or, gee, that doesn't sound good. Maybe she should try blah, blah, right? Or maybe she should do blah, blah. This just comes right out of my mouth. Of course, this is what I know all about. Let me tell you what to do all about this. And of course, those words fell on deaf ears. Anytime my wife tried to relay or communicate any of this, it went absolutely nowhere. And this became, over time, a bit of a point of frustration and difficulty for my wife, because she was not into watching her friends be abused by their significant others, either verbally, physically, or whatever. And I don't mean to state here that there was physical abuse. There wasn't, but there was just months and years of tumultuous, codependent nonsense, right? And when you're outside of it and objective to it and have no emotional connection with it, it's a lot easier to see than when you're in the middle of it, and especially when you're part of it. And when you're part of it, you're actively, emotionally invested and working to justify and rationalize the relationship and make it all make sense, as we've talked about so many times. But in the personal life, on the one-on-one, when it's not some distant objective situation or case study or reality TV or something, when it's in your life and it is your wife and it is her friend, then suddenly it's a lot closer to home. And the words that you use and the knowledge that you have is just as valid as it always has been, but the way that it lands and the ability of people to accept what you're saying, and the ability that you have to actually intrude and create an effect on somebody else's life is suddenly, oh, just how invested am I going to get into this? And how much do I feel I need to go interfere with this person's life anyway? And is it really on me to go do an intervention every single time I run into some person in my life who has a problem, right? How far am I supposed to take this? Where does my responsibility begin and end? Just because I know about things. try to pass this on to my wife. She, of course, absorbs all kinds of information from me over the years and tries to use it as well. But codependency is codependency, and emotional dependence is emotional dependence. And it is very, very hard to argue with that sometimes. And you have choices you have to make when you're faced with that. And my wife chose to try to deal with this and try to, push it aside, try not to deal with it, try to deal with it by not dealing with it, right? Because obviously the advice and the help and the efforts to advise and give some kind of direction to her, or some sort of education to her, or some kind of, well, what about this or what about that? None of it went anywhere. And the friendship, the valid, real admiration and support and mutual, understanding that my wife and her friend had continued. Because that was not the problem. The problem was this external element and my wife's, Susie's reactions to it. And we tried and then realized trying wasn't really going anywhere, and it became more and more toxic. And over time, this entered into and started influencing the relationship between Susie and my wife, because that codependent emotional nonsense started bleeding over into the other relationships that Susie had with her family, with her, and with Mel. And so then the choices became even more difficult, right? Because there would be instances where, my wife would have an issue or problem and seek support or friendship or caring or, just an understanding ear. And instead of that, she would get mountains of judgment and this is what you need to do. Susie would be telling her, well, you need to do this and you need to do this and you need to do this. And you start seeing, the receiving end of this sort of dominating, controlling sort of mode that she would go into. And I understood exactly why she was doing that and exactly what was going on in terms of her power dynamics and the way she juggled her relationships and the way that she was talking to my wife and dealing with her and trying to, in her own way, in Susie's own way, was trying to help my wife with her issues and problems. And it just became more and more difficult and more of a clash, to the point where she had to start drawing boundaries. And I had to start talking to my wife about boundaries and how those might need to be something to enforce in the relationship, because there was a lot of unwanted judgment and a lot of unwanted communication coming her way about, demanding that she solve her problems the way Susie wanted her to solve her problems. And if she didn't, then somehow Mel was in error, or was making mistakes, or was somehow not being approved of. And so finally it came to the point where, something had to be done about it. And it really came down to realizing that I and Mel, despite knowing with utter certainty, with really no doubts, no questions, not really any kind of confusion about this at all, understanding exactly what was going on between Susie and her boyfriend and her relationship dynamics, and how long-term they were truly not constructive for her, not a positive thing. But also realizing that there was absolutely, positively nothing to be said or done about it, because Susie wasn't in a place where she wanted to hear it. And you can't help somebody who doesn't want to be helped. It's very, very hard to do. Right? And so this came to a head. And my wife ended up having to draw boundaries that were crystal clear. And she communicated over and over and over again, look, this is what I'm doing. This is why I'm doing it. This is what has to be done. I can't deal with this barrage of, demands that you give me, Susie, every time I have a problem or issue, and I'm trying to sort out what to do about it, and you can't just listen. You have to, make these demands of me, and it's just not working out. And so she had to walk away from that friendship and leave it behind because it simply became emotionally exhausting for Mel, and it became more of a distraction and a problem than a benefit to Mel's life, to try to maintain this relationship with these toxic influences that were just not going to go away. So one, sees and experiences those kinds of things. I'm sure all of you have experienced very similar things. This is nothing extraordinary or, highly unusual. In fact, that's the point, is that this is the usual sort of drama and trauma and nonsense that goes on all the time with people in their relationships with each other. And just because you're in a position to understand or know about or even be able to deal with these things and really be able to help people with them, if they don't want it, or they're not reaching, or they don't see a need for help, they don't see a need to change, then there is very little you can actually do about that. And if you take that on as your own failing, well, maybe that's kind of a little bit of, a you problem, more so than a world problem or, a problem with people in the world. There is only so much that you can do. And of course, this was followed up with all kinds of doubts and, oh my gosh, should I have, did it, maybe I should, all the things that you go through after you abandon or leave something behind. There's all the coulda, shoulda, woulda, hindsight bias and all the rest that you engage in. And Mel went through all of that as well. And you realize that this idea of coming to a place of acceptance, these 5 stages of grief, or what I call these 5 stages of acceptance, and this sort of rolling through denial and anger and ignoring it and and all the things we do, negotiating with it, trying to bargain with it, are all very organic and just kind of roll out, and you just kind of go through it. And you come finally to a place where all the importance and all of the urgency and all of the, emotional investment of it starts leveling off, and you can start looking more objectively at what you did or what you didn't do, and not be so down on yourself about it afterwards. But it's a journey, isn't it? It really is a little bit of a journey that we all go through in doing those things. And whether we stick to toxic codependent relationships like a magnet or not has an awful lot to do with how much we understand this stuff, but it also has an awful lot to do with our emotional fortitude and our ability to be honest with ourselves about our emotions. And I think that that's sort of what I'm, monologuing a little bit about here today is that process of doing that, because it's not always the easiest thing in the world to do. Okay, now there's more. Sorry, just moving something here out of my way. All right, let's get that. There we go. All right. The other thing that I wanted to relate to you guys, right, is that, well, there's a real nice sort of summary of that I think is fitting here, right, that I wrote down. And that is that Mel didn't want to, and didn't wake up in the morning thinking that it would be a good thing to abandon her friend. That wasn't the intent at all, right? It was really a matter of choosing not to drown with her. Big difference, isn't it? Now, there's another story I want to tell y'all, personal nature, that also drove this home for me directly. My brother and I have had contention in our relationship, and I don't know that I've ever met anyone who hasn't had some degree of contention with their siblings, one way or another, right? So hardly anything unusual or weird going on there. Nothing toxic, nothing abusive, nothing, that extreme, but simply disagreements over ideology, politics, disagreements over conspiracies or interpreting the world and what goes on in it and how things happen, right? Might be another way of putting that. And my brother would come at me sometimes with these ideas that I thought were just, kind of silly. And of course, he thought I was kind of silly for not looking into or believing these things. And I'm not talking about anything as ridiculous as flat earth or something like that. There are millions of variations on themes of conspiracy theories out there that you can dive into, depending on which internet forums you you visit. So I would often end up rolling my eyes over some of the things that my brother would be telling me, and we would actually squabble and get into real arguments over this as I would try to, in my know-it-all way, would sometimes refute his arguments and come back at him with, my own ideas of things. And of course, I was always 100% right, and he was always 100% mistaken. And so, these conversations didn't go very far. And what ended up happening is things actually started getting more and more strained and difficult. And it actually did enter into a conflict zone because there was a period of time, which some of you may have seen, where I was quite adamant about my views ideologically. And I was quite sure that my view was the only view. Surprise. So this was creating problems with my family. And I had hunkered down into a bunker mentality about my politics because I felt it was life or death. It was live or die. It was make break. It was democratic decline. It was creeping authoritarianism. It was cult extremism. It was all the things, I've relayed to you guys for years. I bring that to my family, and my brother's not having any of it because I'm not an ideological authority figure to my brother. I'm my brother, right? That's what we are to each other, not authority figures. And so the relationship is completely different. And for me to treat it as though I'm going to come in and be this teacher and encyclopedic, source of knowledge, and I'm going to give him the what for, and I'm going to straighten him out, and I'm going to tell him how it is, and I'm going to direct him on how he should be thinking. Well, you can imagine this went over like a lead fucking balloon, right? And over and over and over again, we would be having these very strained conversations, and it went red into the red zone pretty fast the more that this went on, to the point where I realized, this is not good, right? And so it was so not good, and it was such a problem to us that I realized that we were both mutually creating it, and the only way to get it under control and not have that toxic disagreement between us was to acknowledge that we simply weren't going to agree and push it aside and not talk about it. Not because we were living in denial, not because we were living in fear, and not because I was living or I felt he should be living in anger, but because we love each other. And there's so much we have in common and so many things we agree on. and so much common history and common ground that we have together, that to put this sort of, spiked rock of awful into the middle of it and go, this is what is now going to define our relationship. It's happening all around us, isn't it? And I was creating that, he was creating that, and we both decided, kind of together, sort of simultaneously, kind of organically, let's not do that. And that was apparently something pretty rare, pretty difficult. Because people get to that headspace that, like I did, where it's life or death. And I started thinking things like, my brother supports authoritarianism. My brother supports death. And of course he doesn't. Of course he doesn't. None of that was true. I was just so hypervigilant and so riled up that it was easy for me to invent wholly delusional, creative, imaginative, completely imaginary ideas about my own brother and his intentions and his desires and his motivations because of this disagreement. And I couldn't have been more wrong. There's not an evil bone in my brother's body. My brother has 2 wonderful children, a loving wife, a home, a job, a career. He's educated. He has made something of himself, and he's a success. There's nothing evil about him. So for me to sit here in my tangled hypervigilance, it's life or death, don't you get it? I had to take a good hard look in the mirror at all the things that I know. All the things about emotion and extremism and belief and ideology and what it does to people. Right? Suddenly I had to look in the mirror and, wait a minute, am I the problem here? Are we both the problem? Which was really the accurate statement. And could we do something different? And we could. And we've been getting along wonderfully ever since. Because we just don't talk about that thing that we don't need to talk about. He has his views, I have mine. And we're okay with that. Because there's so many things that we do agree on and do love each other about and do want to talk about and do get along with each other about. So you accent that. Finally, came to that place in the road where a decision was made, and everything has been pretty good since then. And it was kind of one of those things where I had to look back on it now and go, what was that all about? What is the lesson there? What is that? And wrote a couple notes here. Here's what I walked away with from that. Being right does not equal connection. Think about that one, right? And love does not require agreement on everything. It's sometimes not even on most things. It's amazing. It's really amazing when you can separate those things out a little bit and really do the work. And that influence sometimes destroys the relationship you're trying to protect. Oops. right? So basically, I stopped trying to win over my brother's mind and control that. And the prize that I got was my brother back. you know, I got to keep him. And that was a very, very, very serious life lesson for me, right? Um, because it would be easy. It would be nothing at all. And for quite some time, it wasn't anything at all for me to frame all of that as a big failure, as some kind of deficiency on my part that I chose love over control and influence and domination. I chose love, and I couldn't stop getting over how guilty that was making me feel for quite some time, because somehow I had done him wrong. Like, what? You know? Like how wild the framing of it can get. The way we can talk to ourselves about how we think about our decisions and about our situations, you know? It was like, wow, that was a real head turner for me. And I just had to pass that on to you guys, because I thought, well, you know, maybe there's something that you can take away from that too, you know? Because I'm realizing now, of course, that, you know, that my ability to change the world is negligible. But that doesn't mean that I can't talk about it or share some thoughts or some feelings or some ideas with you guys through the podcast, through my videos, and do the best that I can anyway, right? Because we're all kind of hurting right now, and we are feeling quite helpless, right? There's a lot of instability going on. There's a lot of like uncertainty out there right now, and a lot of you know, like, I don't know what to do, right? And people feel that politics and the economy and government matters and stuff, they like, this has risen to the level of existential crisis. And like, people are like, oh, it's life or death. It's life or death, right? These people want to kill me. These people want to kill me. Well, yeah, sometimes, but you know, it gets a little overblown. And what I found is that when I'm feeling helpless, where I tend to go is, okay, I need to get control. I need to get some predictability. I need to get some stability. What does that mean? It means I'm going to know what's happening. I'm going to know what's coming. I'm going to be able to predict. And in order to do that, I have to be in control. I have to take charge of this situation, right? Which is very Scientological, very cult-like. Just is. And this would, of course, lead to, the more that I would try to enact what I thought of as a solution-oriented mindset, the more fractured and difficult things became, and tense and conflict-driven, you know? And you start even thinking, and I recognized this much. This is when my education kind of finally kicked in, is when I finally started realizing that I was thinking about people like my brother, or people like my family, or people that are close to me, or people that I otherwise would not think badly of. I started thinking about all of those people as enemies. Not just not friends, enemies. You're with us or you're against us. And I am educated enough to know what that means. I'm not going to, and I don't think anybody's going to, solve our global anxiety through personal disagreements or fights. But for a long time, I somehow was convinced that I could. And that somehow I could come here and go on camera and express all of this, with emotion and somehow change you guys too. Because that's what I need to do. I need to change everything. A little bit silly, because fixing society, waking people up, right? These are funny ideas for somebody in my position to have. So instead, I thought I would, and again, I made some notes here, right? I thought instead I might highlight that rather than those big meta idealistic and frankly silly ideas, instead I might share what my walk away from this, or my takeaway from this was, how it's not those big huge things. It's so much more personal. It's so much more one-on-one. It's so much more how we show up. It's whether we're listening. It's whether we're pushing or are we respecting. It's are we aware of and respectful of boundaries, ours and others. Is no okay to hear? Is it okay to hear that word? And if it's not, maybe, well, why not? that question opened up all kinds of doors in my head. Why not? What's so bad about no? What's so bad about disagreement? What's so bad about, okay, you have a different idea than I do? What does that look like? Does it look like concentration camps? No, it doesn't. Not at this level, And it kind of came down to this, right? This was the note, right? You may not be able to change their beliefs, but you can decide whether the relationship survives. And I think one of the gears that we've turned, or one of the things that we've done, that one of the big mistakes we've been making in how we deal with each other is that the disagreements have become more important than the relationships. And that's where we crossed that line, where we messed up. So I can't save everyone, and I can't fix the world, and I can't out-argue people's emotional needs, and I can't out-educate them either. And I can't logic someone out of their identity. So what can I do, right? What can I do moving forward? How should I be in this world as a creator and as someone who wants to share knowledge, experience, and learning to try to help people? How should I do that? How should I approach that? Well, I've 100 episodes into this thing, and of course hundreds of episodes into the Sensibly Speaking podcast that I did before. I can care. I can model boundaries. I can keep relationships where possible. And I can stop trying to control what isn't mine to control. It's really a matter of coming down to, it isn't how influence works. It's kind of where it begins and ends. It's sort of coming to terms with that. I think that's what I wanted to share about all of this is, it's not that helping doesn't matter. It's not that you shouldn't try. It's not that you shouldn't reach out. It's not that you shouldn't try to make a difference. It's not that if somebody is going to be hit by a car, you shouldn't try to tell them, hey, a car is coming, maybe you get out of the way. Obviously, all of these things are very, very important for us to do at a very human level. But it's the make break. It's the it's the if then, it's the yes, no, it's the with us or against us, the binaries, right? The absolutes that are entered into these things that I myself have done so many times and realized that it was all coming from, and continues and will always come from, a really good place with really good intentions of wanting to help and wanting to make the world a better place. But as they say, and as I have said here many, many times, there's a tragedy in the human experience which can't be escaped and can't be avoided, and you can't run away from this. It's too central to how we do what we do. There's a central truth to what we do as human beings and have for millions of years, and that is that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. It's not about whether you mean to do good or not, right? It's a matter of, that's, where all that logic and critical thinking and all that other stuff comes in. It's just a central theme of our existence that we do that. And coming to a place where you go, okay, that's how it is. And so it's not just a matter of having the right intentions, but it's having the respect and the willingness to observe and the willingness to let other people be who they are. And at the end of the day, if I can't do that, and if you can't do that, then what the hell are we doing, right? And I think that's kind of the come to, reflection moment that I'm having today that I wanted to share with you guys, is that I can, that all of us, we can share, we can do our part. Not in any way trying to pull in anybody's flippers or detract from that at all. And of course, I'm not going to stop doing what I'm doing, but I am going to try to tailor it a little bit differently, perhaps, than how I have treated it, like I'm on some kind of, mission from God or something. And if I don't somehow change you in some significant, important way, then I'm a failure. That's nonsense. And that's what I'm sort of proposing, that maybe we move past and not do anymore. And I thought that was worth sharing today. So I hope that you found that to be worth sharing as well. Let me check in over here and just see how we are doing in terms of our comments and stuff. Good. Nobody tearing me a new asshole or anything. So good. Must have gone over all right. So on that happy note, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this episode, the 100th episode of our Speaking of Cults podcast. I hope that some of these reflections were, useful and educational for you. But they certainly were for me. And I think it's from that place that I'm sharing this, right? Whether you get something out of this, whether this is helpful in your relationships or your life, maybe it's just food for thought. Maybe you'll just think about what I've said, and if you do, I'd love to hear any of your feedback. I don't solicit that enough, I think. I really am very interested in what you guys take away from the things that I say. Today, maybe more so than usual. So feel free to comment away and let me know what your thoughts are about all of this. And whether I've left something important out or something big, or, you think I might have some huge blind spot still about all of this, I'm more than happy to consider what you have to say. All right. Thank you very much for coming around and listening to me blabber on to moderate, as I say, here live today. And this will go posted up audio on the audio version probably later today or tomorrow. I will get this posted up on the usual podcast streams. Obviously, we're running later than usual on our podcast release time because I usually release at midnight last night. Anyway, all right. See you guys soon. I will see you tomorrow, in fact, right here for Critical Q&A. All right. Bye-bye.